Welcome everyone to tonight's meeting of Indivisible Rural Illinois. We're thrilled that you're able to be with us here tonight. I am going to put a screen up to show you who Indivisible Rural Illinois is. There we are. We meet the first Thursday evening of the month from 7:30 to 9. And guess what? This is the first Thursday night of the month. And here it is, 7:30 p.m. And this is the way that you can sign up. If you go to that bit.ly, you can sign up to be on the list so you can get notifications for Indivisible Rural Illinois meetings. There we have 3 leads of this group now. We're very excited. Jessica Motzinger is going to be joining us as a lead on this group as soon as she gets through her big event on June 18th. So there is who we are, and I will stop sharing. So Indivisible Rural Illinois is a group subcommittee of Indivisible Illinois, and we formed in November of 2020. Our purpose is to meet the needs of our rural groups, but we have a secondary purpose, and that is to educate the metro groups about some of the unique challenges that are faced by progressives in rural Illinois. And we are very, very excited tonight because we are going to have a wonderful presentation on what we really need to know about climate change and how we can influence voters on this issue. But before we jump to Dr. Schafer, who's going to be our presenter tonight, we would like to share some announcements of things that are coming up. And so, Marcy, do you want to begin with sharing what's coming up?
Sure. For anybody who is interested, and I hope there are a lot of people that are, every Saturday from 4 to 5:30, Indivisible Illinois and Indivisible Milwaukee collaborate on a phone bank. We phone bank to several different parts of Illinois and Wisconsin. One of the places is Lauren Underwood's district, Illinois 14. And she's, for those of you who don't know, she's U.S. representative right now for that district. We also are doing it for Champaign County, Illinois, and Vermilion County, Illinois, and Milwaukee, Wisconsin, asking voters to get their vote by mail ballots. And we really could use volunteers to help with phone banking. It's every Saturday from 4 to 5:30 on Zoom, and I'm going to put the link in the chat right now. Thank you.
And if you've just come on, we'll ask you to please mute yourself unless you are one of the presenters so that we can keep our background noise at a minimum. And there is the link for the phone bank. Thank you, Marcy.
So, and now I would bet that that the Truth Brigade would like to make an announcement about their Friday Truth Sandwich things. I don't know which one of you wants to say something, but go for it.
I can. Can you
Hi,
hear me?
Anna.
Yeah. So if you don't know what a truth sandwich is, but you're really upset about all the lies that are swirling around in social media and between people offline, we have a situation that may help you. And if you already know it, how to do a truth sandwich, that's good. You can come to it anyhow. This Friday, I think that's tomorrow, isn't it? Yeah. We're having a truth sandwich shop, and that's from 11 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. So what we'll do is create some messages to counter disinformation. And undoubtedly, we're going to be probably doing something related to gun safety. We may get really inspired tonight with what Tracey is going to tell us. And I'm sure we will. So we may have something connected to climate that we'll be doing too. So if you don't know, come and join us and find out. You don't have to stay the whole time. You can come in for a while and then leave. Or if you do know and want to just get better at doing that, come join us.
Thank you, Etta. Are there any other announcements of activities going on with Indivisible? All right. One quick announcement we have is that we are sure that you are going to have questions about Dr. Schafer's presentation tonight. And so we're asking you to please put those questions in the chat as they come to your mind. And following her presentation, then we will call on you. Hopefully we'll be able to do that in chronological order and let you ask your questions of Dr. Schafer. And now I believe that Marcy is going to introduce Dr. Schafer to us.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. And just an FYI, after Dr. Schafer speaks and we have the question and answers, the Truth Brigade will tell us how to message all that stuff. So anyway, Dr. Tracey Schafer, PhD, is a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Florida in Wetland Biogeochemistry. Among other things, she has done research on how hurricanes affect soil and water. Dr. Schafer also spent over 2 years in the Peace Corps in Senegal dealing with agri-forestry and farming. She received a BS in Natural Resources and Environmental Science from the University of Illinois. She received her master's and PhD from University of Florida in Soil and Water Sciences. At the and she is now, as I said, a postdoctoral fellow. Please welcome Dr. Tracey Schafer. Thank you.
All right. Hello, everyone. Well, my mom just gave me a pretty good introduction. I'm going to share my screen real quick. Let's see. I don't know if all right. Let's see. There we go. Sorry.
Myself on mute.
All right. So tonight I'm going to talk to you about climate change. I know that this is mainly based at how to talk to voters about this issue. That is not necessarily my forte, but I'm going to give you a lot of information that can hopefully be helpful if you are actually discussing this with people and trying to push policies through and other things like that. So my mom already gave me an introduction. So this is basically everything she said. I am currently at a marine lab through the University of Florida. So I study a lot of things involving soil and water quality. And I'm a biogeochemist by trade, which basically means I study nutrient cycling and chemical cycling in the environment. So we look at a lot of things that are related to greenhouse gas emissions because we look at how carbon is stored in soils or vegetation, or how it might be released into the atmosphere in the form of carbon dioxide. So I first want to give you some useful information that you might want to know about climate change. And I'm going to do this in kind of question and answer form. So one of the questions that probably come up quite frequently is, have humans actually had an impact on the climate? Is this something that is just natural, or are we actually having an effect? And the answer is yes, we have. And you can see this in this graph here. So essentially we're looking at over hundreds of thousands of years. And if you look back, from 800,000 years ago, you can see that there's a lot of variation in our CO2 concentration. So when CO2 is high, it means that our climate is a lot warmer. And when it is lower, it means that our climate is a lot colder. So this goes up and down over time. There are natural cycles that are involved with this. However, when we look at around the time of the Industrial Revolution, which started about 1850s or so, we see this very, very steep increase in our CO2. So nothing before this point has ever looked like that. So even though we see a lot of natural variation in our CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere, which means we see a lot of variation in how warm our climate is, this is unique. And this graph at the top, you can see where the Industrial Revolution starts. So when we look at the kind of end of this green section into the black, you can see that this just continues to increase even more steeply. So that means we're just releasing more and more CO2 as, of course, we've grown by producing cars, by producing other forms of transportation, mechanized industry, things like this. We have become larger and larger emitters of carbon dioxide. And it is very clearly us, since we're the thing that has changed over the past 170 or so years. So another question that is, I think, quite common is wondering if CO2 is the only greenhouse gas, and it is not. So even though CO2 is one that we focus on all the time, there are a lot of other greenhouse gases besides just carbon dioxide. And so when we look at some of these other greenhouse gases, though, we actually compare them directly to carbon dioxide and what we call the global warming potential. So the global warming potential for carbon dioxide is 1, because we're just comparing it to itself. Whereas for methane, for example, this is 21, which means that it has 21 times the ability to warm our climate as carbon dioxide. However, we also have another factor here, which is the atmospheric lifetime, which just means the amount of years that it exists in our atmosphere before it breaks down. So carbon dioxide will be in our atmosphere 50 to 200 years. Methane will be in there 12 to 15. So this is a much shorter time period, even though it's apt to warm our climate more than carbon dioxide. When we look at nitrous oxide, which is another big greenhouse gas, this is 120 years, but it has a global warming potential of 310 times that of carbon dioxide. So this is likely to cause much more warming effect than just CO2. We do have some less common other greenhouse gases, such as hydrofluorocarbons. Don't worry too much about this. It's essentially just showing you that, okay, we have some other things that have a much higher potential to warm our planet than just CO2. We don't emit these things in the same concentrations that we do carbon dioxide, methane, or nitrous oxide, but they are something to worry about just because a little bit can go such a long way. And then when we look at our 3 biggest emitters, we have carbon dioxide here, methane in the middle, and nitrous oxide on the bottom. And you can just see this very clear trend with these 3, again, our 3 most common greenhouse gases, that these are all increasing pretty steadily since 1850. So again, since the Industrial Revolution. So clearly we've had an impact. Something is happening that is follows our timeline of when we started producing a lot more CO2 emissions and methane emissions very closely. So just to give you a little bit more information about where all of these, our 3 most common greenhouse gases come from. I'm sure you all know a little bit about carbon dioxide, just since that's the most publicized. Of course, this comes from, your cars, airplanes, any type of transportation, you will emit carbon dioxide. And unfortunately, deforestation also has an impact on this, because as we get rid of all the trees that can actually take up CO2, because that's what that's what vegetation does, essentially. We lose the ability to store a lot of this compound on Earth. And so then it just becomes more common in our atmosphere. So methane is something that is emitted from plants decaying. So there are natural amounts of methane, But when we farm rice paddies, for example, we release a lot more methane. Concentrated feeding operations where you have large amounts of animals, those will also emit large amounts of methane, especially cows. They're one of our biggest sources of this chemical. And then nitrous oxide is also released from agricultural processes, but it also comes from vehicle engines as well, and some of the same sources that we see CO2 coming from. So I know this is a group focused on rural Illinois. So I was asked to talk a little bit about how agriculture can be impacted or affect climate change. So does it really have an impact on climate change? Yes, it does, but it kind of depends on how you're farming, what you're farming, things like that. So globally, there are actually only 3 crops that provide most of the nutrients for the world. And this is wheat, rice, and corn. So globally, again, this is not all we eat in this country, but in a lot of places where they're, primarily subsistence farmers, these are 3 of the biggest crops. So in the United States and a lot of the other industrial or the other first world countries, we've also started eating a lot more meat over time. And meat is kind of an indication of wealth, which is why this tends to be more common in the first world. It's expensive. And we see this in how it actually takes 8 kilograms of grain to produce only 1 kilogram of beef. So we could feed 8 times as many people if we just ate the grain directly, as opposed to if we feed it to a cow and then eat the cow. And if we look at this graph over here, you can kind of see the comparisons. So if we farm 1 kilogram of grain, we're going to be able to make 1 kilogram of bread. So this is, a direct, input of those nutrients. So we don't have to feed it to anything and have them grow and then eat that. But if we feed all that grain to a fish, it's 1.5 kilograms of grain to get 1 kilogram of fish, then 2 kilograms of grain to get 1 kilogram of chicken, 3 for 1 pig, and then 8 for a cow, which is one of the most energy intensive animals to actually farm. So in addition to just the grain, it takes a lot more to actually make your quarter-pound burger that you might get from a restaurant. So it takes 6.7 pounds of grain for just that 1 quarter pound of burger, but it also takes 52 gallons of water, 74 square feet of grazing land, assuming that the cows are actually able to graze. And then 1,000 BTUs for transport. So this is very energy intensive. And in addition, it's estimated that these livestock, especially cows, produce up to 20% of the world's emission of greenhouse gases. So essentially, meat production is very energy intensive in the intake of energy, but also the, greenhouse gases that they emit from that. So, of course, meat might not be the best thing to eat for the environment, but I also understand, that doesn't mean that everyone's going to give up meat tomorrow, which is totally understandable. That's nothing that I'm telling you have to do right away. But there are some more sustainable farming practices that can also help cut down on greenhouse gas emissions, as well. That doesn't have to involve cutting down on your meat eating and things like that. So one of the best sources for looking at some of these sustainable practices is from the Union of Concerned Scientists. And they put out a publication. This is online, so anyone can look this up. And it's called Farming Carbon into Soils and Trees, a Climate Smart Mid-Century Strategy for Agriculture. So I won't go through all of this in detail, but essentially they give you a lot of tips and information about how to keep a lot of the carbon in the soil instead of releasing it in your agricultural processes. And one thing they didn't mention that I will is actually eating, especially like beef that is more, that is free range instead of force-fed corn. They actually emit a lot less methane because their bodies are actually meant to process the grass. So that is also another thing to look out for. But yeah, depending on what crops you plant, if you use no-till cropping, different perennials, things like that, you can actually keep a lot of your CO2 in the soil instead of releasing it out into the atmosphere. In addition, the National Resource Conservation Service has actually started giving farmers a lot more benefits if they actually switch to better practices for sustainability. But yeah, there's a lot of different systems they recommend here. This includes things like agri-forestry. If you plant trees on your farm fields, you can actually help with soil improvement. A lot of the carbon will actually be stored in the tree too. And so as your trees go, you're storing more CO2 and helping the environment in that way. This also provides shade for any animals you might have grazing there, and also for some crops that might need it as well. But essentially, I guess the big thing is really supporting farmers who use some of these sustainable practices and who are buying into some of these NRCS programs, because they're actually trying to make an effort to make their lives a little bit more sustainable. So moving on, what are some of the important impacts of climate change that we should discuss? So one of the things that you may or may not be aware of is even though our atmosphere, we're releasing more greenhouse gases, which trap more heat. So our climate is warming. Our oceans are also warming with that as well. So over 90% of the excess heat that we are generating is actually trapped in the ocean. So this is a big problem since as we heat up our ocean, we're melting a lot of Arctic sea ice, glaciers, things like that. And as we melt all of this ice, we're of course getting rid of all of the habitat that polar bears need, penguins, all of these animals that live in those systems. But in addition, we're causing our sea levels to rise. Since all of this, since all of the ice is melting, that's now water that's added to the ocean. And so we are seeing our oceans get a little bit higher. And in addition to that, as well as absorbing heat, they're actually also absorbing some of the excess CO2. So if you've ever heard from your dentist how, soda is bad for your teeth. Well, soda is essentially, water and some flavoring and CO2. And the CO2 actually makes that soda acidic. And since it's acidic, it's bad for your tooth enamel because your tooth enamel is made of a basic compound. And so when you add acid to it, it breaks it down. So it's actually very similar what's happening in the ocean, where as you add CO2, you're making it more acidic. And then things like corals are having a lot more difficulty surviving. So here is just a comparison between 1998 and 2006. And these are just dots showing where coral bleaching has been occurring. And when we look at 1998, we can just see that there are fewer dots than in 2006. So this is becoming more and more of an issue over time. In addition to coral, there are a lot of other organisms that are made up of calcium carbonate, which is one of these basic compounds that if you add CO2 to it, they're not able to form these calcium carbonate shells. So they're not able to grow and survive as well as if, the ocean wasn't as acidic. And some of these, such as clams and oysters, some of these shelly organisms over here are also great for the environment because they actually filter out a lot of the bad pollutants that are in our waterways. So they're helping to clean our water. So we really want to keep them there. We don't want them to dissolve. So I also mentioned that sea level rise is occurring. So this graph shows from the late 1800s up till now. Sorry, I know this is a lot of graphs. As a scientist, this is what I'm used to looking at. So please ask me for any clarification after that's necessary. But the main thing to look at here is you can see that we've just had a very steep increase in our sea levels. And it's only, 230 millimeters, which is less than a foot. So I know this doesn't seem like a lot in terms of, okay, our sea levels rise a foot. What's the big deal? But there's a lot of places in the world where if you're at sea level, or even like New Orleans, where you're slightly below sea level, you have to put in structures to actually be able to keep your city or your home or wherever you're, wherever you're living essentially from being underwater. And this is a lot harder as the sea level continues to rise, because whatever walls you've built or whatever structures you have in place are not going to be enough anymore, or they're going to break down, and then you're going to see a lot more flooding. So I know in Illinois, this is not a big issue, but it is one of the bigger ones related to climate change overall. So some of the other observations we've seen from climate change are that growing seasons are getting longer, which might not seem like a bad thing right away. But this is also leading to a lot of changes in how animals are breeding or where the ranges are. And if an animal is able to extend their range and live in a place that it couldn't previously, it might mean that it's also pushing out another animal that doesn't have anywhere else to go. So this can impact other organisms in that area. In addition, since our climate's changing, this means that some areas are actually becoming a lot drier. So we're seeing more frequent droughts, which of course can lead to wildfires or difficulty in farming. And in other areas, we can actually see a lot more frequent and severe storms. So for example, as our ocean's getting hotter, this means that our ocean's hot. If you mix some cooler air with it, then you get hurricane development. And so as the ocean gets hotter, you're more likely to see more hurricanes, and they're more likely to be a lot more intense. In addition, again, some species are declining or actually going extinct due to the warming temperatures. And this could be a direct impact from maybe their habitat is no longer exists there, or maybe they just can't compete with whatever is moving into their area. So, so this is becoming a big issue for essentially a lot of the natural systems we have all over the globe. So how might this influence immigration? So people will migrate when they don't have enough food. I mean, if you have a drought or flooding or natural disasters, this might mean that your fields don't have enough water, or maybe they're flooded a lot, so you don't really have the ability to get enough crops to feed your family. In addition, if there's a lot of scarcity of food because the farms haven't been able to produce very well, it's probably going to drive prices of food up, and that might also mean it's really hard for families to pay for food. In addition, there's possibilities of destruction of homes. Again, if you're living right next to the ocean and sea level rises and your home isn't high enough, you're going to end up underwater. Or if you live in an area that is more affected by drought, that could mean that it's more likely to be burned down by a wildfire. So even though these aren't direct impacts of climate change, there are a lot of indirect effects that can affect people and potentially make them want to move. In addition, climate change is not cheap. So not all countries are able to afford a lot of the impacts and be able to mitigate those. So that means that if your economy collapses because you can't keep up with all of the costs, then again, people might not want to live there anymore. So one extreme example of this is a small island in the South Pacific called Kiribati. And there was a story that came out, I believe this was in 2015, where their previous president actually bought 200 hectares of land in Fiji, so he could move his entire country there if sea level rises too much and they actually can't survive on that island anymore, or it might be completely submerged. So hopefully this never happens, but it shows how some places are getting kind of desperate and very concerned about the situation. And so they're going to extremes to try and find ways to help their people or to make it through some of the big changes we're likely to see. So I mentioned that climate change isn't cheap. So what is this actually costing us? So if we prevent a lot of the impacts from climate change now, this would cost us about 5% of our world GDP. So again, this might mean moving towards more sustainable energy. If we have more sustainable energy, electric cars, things like that, then this could potentially really help. However, if we just keep waiting and don't develop these technologies in the near future, this will actually end up costing us about 20% of the world GDP. So later means it's going to cost taxpayers, obviously, a lot more as well. And in order to make these this effective and cut down our costs, and energy production will actually need to be 80% decarbonized by 2050. So this is going to be easier for a lot of the wealthier countries, again, like the US. We have the ability at least to develop some of these technologies and also afford some of the costs of how this could, some of the changes. We have air conditioner if it gets very, very hot, where, in other places it might be a point where it's like it could actually kill people because it's so hot in that country, for example. And unfortunately, a lot of the poorer nations will suffer the most, even though they're not the biggest polluters. And at least 200 million people could become refugees, climate refugees, essentially. So I know that's not directly related to Illinois, but just, anywhere we can have impacts on our climate. And to give you an idea, this is a map of 2017, and this is the $1 billion weather and climate disasters. So each one of these means that it costs at least $1 billion to fix some of the issues that it's caused. So this is anywhere from tornadoes to hurricanes, to wildfires, things like that. And you can see that there are actually several dots on this map. So some of these disasters cost us several $1 billion. And as these increase more and more, this means that they're going to get more and more expensive. So just want to give you a useful resource for some of the information if you're interested in learning more about climate change. I would definitely recommend going to the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, or the IPCC. They've created a lot of great documents over the years. You can learn about things such as the Kyoto Protocol or the Paris Agreement, which are some big, global agreements, which of course affect anyone in that agreement, which means all of us, or it might. But in addition, they've actually created a lot of good documents between 1990 and 2021. Which talk about a lot of the climate change impacts. And these also have a lot of, they have more technical reports, but they also have a lot of reports geared to just the general public. So if you're trying to pull information from somewhere to give to voters, these would actually be great resources. They're very well researched. The IPCC is a panel of scientists. They don't actually do the research, but they take all of the research that has happened in the past years and put it together to make something meaningful. So from their 2013 to 2014 report, they said there's a 99% probability that some of the observed climate changes are the result of human activities. So as scientists, we won't say 100%, but it means that we're very, very certain that we have caused an impact on the climate. The report also stated that our projections of warming are between 1 and 6 degrees Celsius by 2100, with a better estimate being between 2 and 4 degrees Celsius, which is 3 to 8 degrees Fahrenheit. And just to give you an idea, in the past 20,000 years, we've seen an increase of 5 degrees Celsius. So if we're increasing by 2 to 4 degrees Celsius in, 100 years or so, that's a much larger increase than, we've seen in any other period that's that short. So that is a pretty drastic step up. So at this point, I know I've given you a lot of very fast information about, climate change and how, humans have caused a lot of these things to occur. So you might be wondering, what can I do to help? So again, I talked about meat production before, but I understand there are little things you can do every day, and it doesn't have to be drastically changing your life either. Maybe there's some times where you can walk, bike, or take public transportation instead of driving. You just need to, go a couple of blocks away. Of course, this saves a little bit of CO2 emissions because you're not driving your car. Airplanes are also very CO2, generate a lot of CO2. Again, it doesn't mean you have to stop flying completely. These are just some suggestions. Clearly reducing your meat consumption, that helps a little bit. Maybe even just, okay, maybe 3 times a week, I won't eat meat at certain meals. But this also could support sustainable agriculture. So people that use agri-forestry systems and are working really hard to keep a lot of the carbon in their soil and the vegetation on their farms. And also supporting companies that use solar, wind, or other sustainable energies to create the products. You can also think about changing to solar energy. This is, of course, very expensive still. There are more programs are being developed to help pay for the costs of the solar panels. The good thing is over time, you're actually able to sell some of your excess energy back to the grid. So it could actually end up canceling out some of the extra cost in the end, but this of course takes time. And, I know not everyone can afford to put solar panels on the roof, but it's just something to look at. And then, just remembering to turn off light switches, things like that. If you're reducing your energy, you're helping to reduce the amount of either natural gas, which a lot of is methane, or CO2 that is needed. So from that, I'll leave you with a quote. This is from Edmund Burke, who was, I guess, Irish, kind of a wealthy Irishman who was also a philosopher, but he had a good quote that was, "Nobody made a greater mistake than he who did nothing because he could only do a little." So means that little changes can also have a big impact overall if we all make those little changes. All right, so that's all I have. I'll stop sharing unless anyone has any questions about the presentation.
Yes, we do. There are some questions in the chat, but Tracey,
Okay.
I have to say, I learned so much, and you are so clear and so wonderful in your presentation. And I noticed that you didn't ever say reduce, reuse, recycle, which is used to be the #1 thing that people would say. If you want to help climate change, those are the things that you should do. And you didn't. Is that passé? Yeah.
No, I mean, it's definitely still good to do all of those things for sure. It's a little bit of a different issue, I guess. Because if if you're throwing everything away that's going into landfills or that's going into the ocean. So as it breaks down, it can release some greenhouse gases and lead to climate change, but a lot of that is dealing with microplastics and other issues that, have to do with pollution. In terms of recycling, I hate to say it, but it actually does generate some excess greenhouse gases just from the process of the manufacturing and breaking down compounds. But it is not to say you shouldn't do it. It's, always great to recycle. I definitely recommend, trying not to throw everything away. So no, those are great practices. They're a little bit, of like a different issue, but it's definitely, always good to still do that.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Tracey, because I really needed to ask that. Okay, let's get to the questions that we had in the chat. I think that Garrick, your question was answered. Perhaps he had a question in and then you answered it in your next slide. So that was pretty cool. Vanessa, do you want to ask your question? Take yourself off mute and then ask your question. Let's see. Find Vanessa. Vanessa, are you with us?
I actually think someone in the chat answered her question. She was wondering about a link for the article, and someone did find
And
it.
I think Jenny Lemoyne. Yes.
Good job. Sorry,
Yeah,
I can provide, I can give you the presentation or any links that you might want also.
All right, thank you. Actually, Jenny, who answered that question, just finished her degree in environmental science at Northern Illinois University. So, and then Susan had a question, and I'm really anxious to hear the answer to this one. So Susan, will you ask, please?
Yeah, thanks, Tracey. Really enjoyed your presentation. I've been listening to climate podcasts and news accounts and have done a lot of reading on climate issues, and listened to one recently where climate grief was discussed, and just wondering if that is something that you personally have dealt with, and if you have, or if you haven't, what suggestions you might have to people who are experiencing that, which I think, based upon what I have learned recently, it's just going to be a problem that's just going to be growing exponentially, especially among young people.
Yeah. I have never heard the term climate grief, but I definitely have dealt with that before, especially, most of my PhD was kind of looking up a lot of things about climate change, since I was studying impacts of hurricanes, which are becoming more intense and frequent because of this issue. And it definitely gets overwhelming for sure. I think that's no doubt, especially when it's like you look at all the information together, like we just did in this presentation, it's like, okay, we've caused a lot of problems. But I think it also helps to look at some of the solutions, like what are the little things you can change to kind of help, on a day-to-day basis, but also looking up a lot of information about, what people are doing to, improve sustainable technology and energies, things like that. So I think just learning more about it and what new research and technology has been developed really helps me, because then it shows that there is hope and we are moving in a direction where, there is something that can be done. And as we learn more about the problem, we learn more about what we can do.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. What a great question, Susan. Thank you so much. Silver, I think you had a comment. Did you want to make that comment to everyone? We'll go on. Sue Harvey had a question.
Is that about the solar panels?
Yes,
I'm looking through it.
Yes.
That's awesome that they're not expensive. It's good to hear.
Yeah, and then Jim also had a comment about solar panels. In Illinois, we've had some support Maybe if we skip ahead, and Jim, can you just tell a little bit about your solar panels? I'm wondering. Be sure you come off mute to be able to, whoops. Kidding. Oh. Jim, are you there?
Actually, Silver now has her hand up, so she's.
Okay, Silver, yes, please. It takes a minute when I call on you to get your mute button and find us. Okay. Silver?
I don't be able to do it.
We're not hearing you.
No.
Silver, we're not hearing you. We're not hearing your question.
You're now on mute, Silver. If you could unmute yourself.
That's still working, is it?
Yeah, that
Yes,
works.
now we can hear you. Yes.
Okay. Now it was kind of rough to say that, Peter Thomas and Extinction Rebellion, Science Rebellion, and I know some of those, it's not really, but I actually asked Extinction Rebellion to come here, but I couldn't get enough support with those progressive to really, commit to a large enough group for them to go down. Now, I'm not a scientist, but I'm leaving the time now. He promises we have to cut emissions 10% starting now by 2030 or boom. There is some debate on how bad it is. Some people think we're all sort of hold heads, I guess, as society collapses. I think and absolutely everything on the planet dies. That's, I think, the optimist view. By some, anyways. Other people think there's going to be a lot of chaos. I'm considering conspiracy theory because I think there'll be collapse, but I think there'll be survivors. I don't know why that's conspiracy theory. But I mean, we really do have to act now. This isn't something, in my view, that we have time for. According to people like Peter Count, I mean, we've got to reduce emissions by 10% a year until 2030, or like 6 billion people are going to die. That's just the way it is, from my understanding of things. Which is pretty serious. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's what I've heard.
Silver, you're breaking up a little bit, so it's hard.
It just says everything.
I'm gonna pass it back to Tracy. Were you able to hear enough of that to make a comment?
So I think you're asking essentially if we're not doing enough right now, then essentially people are going to end up dying later from the impacts. And I mean, I'm sure some people, again, this is going to hit the world unequally. So there are certain parts of the world that'll probably be more affected than other parts of the world, especially the wealthier countries. But yeah, I mean, I think it'd be great, if we could cut, 10% immediately, but I don't think we're quite there yet. But I don't think it's necessarily going to mean, complete collapse immediately. I think it's just going to mean we're, certain parts of the world are going to be maybe unlivable. So there's going to be a lot more migration, and that's probably going to mean that, we're stuffing a lot of people into more areas, things like that. So I think the real thing is no one quite knows yet. That's, what we study to try and learn more about. And of course, the main focus now is trying to figure out ways to mitigate some of the possible issues we're going to see in the future. We don't know anything 100%, but again, if we do absolutely nothing now, then we're more likely to see some of the worst impacts in the future, for sure.
And that's, I was so encouraged when I saw your last slide, because that it's so true that, you can get so overwhelmed, but if we each just do what we can, it's really, really helpful. Etta, Etta, could you go ahead and ask your question, please?
Yes, I'm all for encouraging people to change their habits. What I'm wondering is maybe equally important, like really trying to impact policy change, because that seems like that's going to be the big time thing that will push us to the next level of, being better.
Mhm.
Any thoughts about that?
I mean, I agree that it would be great to see some policy changes. Unfortunately, I will admit that's not my forte. I do a lot of the research, but I'm not necessarily involved in policy that much at this point. But yeah, I agree. If, especially when it comes to some of the biggest CO2 or greenhouse gas emitters, which are some of like big business and things like that. If there's more regulations on, they have to, put CO2 scrubbers, or they have to have better business practices to make their companies more sustainable, things like that. More benefits for farmers to, do sustainable practices. All that would be great. I mean, so I agree, it would be awesome to see some policy changes. Exactly what that means and how that would happen, I'm not quite sure.
Okay, great, Tracy. And she told us from the very beginning when we asked Tracy if she would join us on this, she said she has the scientific data and she can explain climate change, but policy is not her strength. And I wrote down a name and I can't read my handwriting. Carrie, did you have a question? Let me find. Yes, Carrie. You asked about supplements.
Yeah, well, this is in general I mean, this is a great presentation, but it's talking to the choir. I mean, we already all know all this, but my rural friends first off will say, so climate change isn't caused by human activity, it's caused by God. So how do we combat that, number one? And on a more practical basis, saying we should eat less beef or drink less milk is not going to go well with rural people that raise cattle. So, we'd do better with getting them to reduce the methane from the cattle. And I believe there are supplements like kelp that can do that, but I don't see them being pushed. Maybe they are, and I don't know that because I'm not a farmer. But
Yeah.
Tracy, you did talk about that a little bit about the difference with raising cattle in a more sustainable way.
So I actually don't know about supplements for cattle specifically. The main thing I know is if they are fed grass or, some of the things that they're actually meant to eat as ruminants, as opposed to like corn, for example, they do actually produce less methane. That's just because of digestive processes. It's more what, their stomachs are made for as opposed to corn. I know that's expensive, but
farmer friend has to feed, in order to feed them grass, he'd have to, cut his food size by 90%. He doesn't have the grass land to do it.
I get it. I'm actually not well versed in specifically what supplements you need to feed cattle. That might be something to look into because now I'm curious, but I cannot give you a good answer for that today. I'm sorry.
All right. I'm going to go back to a question that I had from your presentation. You talked about the various sources of various gases, and you talked about HFCs and how devastating those are. Are we talking there? I'm going to show my ignorance here. Are those the kinds of gases that you used to find in like hairspray and other aerosols, and now hopefully we've eliminated some of that? Is that
Yeah,
what
yeah. So CFCs, which I think are a very similar group to that we've eliminated, are, at least in the US, they're pretty much banned. I don't think all of those compounds that I had on the chart are necessarily banned. There's also some ways of getting around it for certain things, but yeah, what used to be in hairsprays, I believe what used to be in like refrigerant and all of these things that are actually really pretty, have very high global warming potentials. There are a lot of them that have been banned or are being slowly banned. But the other thing is, just because they're banned here doesn't mean they're banned everywhere.
Right.
So there's probably other sources of emission in other countries that, we don't really have control over.
Yeah. Great. And then Annie had a question. Annie had her question about Indigenous knowledge. That's a good one. Annie,
The reason I asked this question is because many people who are members of Indigenous communities around the world have been able to demonstrate thousands of years of survival, pre-industrialized life, and they have a lot of knowledge that's based on centuries, millenniums of experience. So I'm just wondering how much is the work on climate change linking with Indigenous communities and what they have to share in terms of what needs to happen for things to change. And then a corollary question would be for us to think about what are the social implications of the cost of people of color communities being impacted the most by climate change. And we see what's happening in Bangladesh and India right now. Dying from the heat.
Right.
They're just falling out of the sky because of the heat. It's just, it seems overwhelming.
Yeah. And I mean, it definitely is. In terms of your first question, that is, I'm actually not sure. That is something that is more of a sociological question. Again, this is another thing. I'm sorry, I'm not really well versed on what the what Indigenous knowledge could be used to help with climate change. But it is definitely something that should be asked, and I would hope that there is someone talking to those communities and learning from them. Sorry, what was your second question?
Well, I was just thinking in terms of the work of people like Gregory Kahete, who has written, and he's an educator, and he's written about Indigenous knowledge is quite a bit, especially as it pertains to the environment. And that, how we in the industrialized nations, what's our role in relating to where the impact of climate change is happening the most, which is around the equatorial regions. What do we have to do? I mean, people are dying as we're meeting here. People are dying from the heat.
It's true. I mean, that's, I think, a really difficult question. When we look at who are some of the biggest greenhouse gas emitters, I mean, we're one of them. So I think it's, again, working on controlling our emissions, because that's going to affect them, is more of the direct impact, I guess. In terms of, right now, though, that's definitely a hard thing. I mean, it can, maybe that means, somehow changing like immigration policies or something. But yeah, essentially a lot of the biggest greenhouse gas emitters, such as us, I guess, well, China's also one of them, but us in Europe are, we're going to feel the impacts a lot less than a lot of the poorer nations. So it's just, by reducing our emissions and trying to do our part a little bit better, we can help them in that way by, not making it as difficult for them, since since they're not really producing as much of the issue as we are.
And that comes down to empathy, which is something we've talked about on a whole range of topics in this group. I'm going to pass it to Candace.
Sorry about that. Let me see. Yeah, my question was, what do you see as the most common or most outstanding misunderstanding about climate change? Like what misinformation do you run into the most?
Yeah, so I actually got this question over email a little bit earlier. I mean, I think the biggest thing I hear a lot about is humans have had no impact on the climate. It's not us, we're not doing it. I'm sure there's a lot of other, misunderstandings about it, but that's, I guess, the biggest one that I tend to come across or have heard from down the grapevine.
Yeah, that's the one I get back. So I get, yeah, people will say, oh, come on. It's this climate change has been happening for a very long time. And no matter how often you show them that spike, they think it's part of some natural process.
Yeah.
I do think that graph that you showed, however, early in your presentation, Tracy, makes it so abundantly clear that obviously humans have had such an amazing impact on this. And this is, I think many people on this call know that I have some neighbors that I have debated with as we used to walk in the morning. And that was the big one. They would say, oh no, this is just a part of a cycle that's been going on for millennia. No, the cycle has changed. So your graph really helps with that.
Yeah, there's plenty of others of those online too. If you Google it, you'll come up with a lot of graphs that show you the same thing.
And we loved your graphs. Don't apologize for your graphs.
Oh, no, I'm saying I took a lot of them from Google. So thank Google.
And we thank you for that, for finding them for us so we don't have to. Jody, I think you had a question you wanted to share.
Okay, it's a little goofy, but
no, I love it. I want to know the answer to this one, Jody. So please ask.
Well, I understand the whole concept of the rising oceans. Do rivers rise because we have so many rivers in Illinois? I mean, and what's the deal with the Great Lakes, I guess, too?
Oh, so rivers definitely, yes. If you're seeing a lot of changes in your climate patterns, you're also could be seeing changes in precipitation. So if you're getting a lot more rain, that could definitely lead to rivers rising more. In areas where I'm living, like Florida, this is an issue just because if you see, sea level rise or hurricanes or, we get so many storms that our rivers actually do tend to flood pretty frequently. So that also kind of depends on where you're living. But yeah, if you're in an area that's getting a lot more rain because, changing in the climate will mean some places get drier, some places get wetter, then that could definitely lead to rising rivers. In terms of Lake Michigan, since that is a freshwater lake, I think the biggest thing is you'll also see a lot of the water there getting warmer. And so if the water is getting warmer in Lake Michigan, then there's probably going to be a lot of, fish and other organisms that are living in there that aren't going to like it very much or be able to tolerate it. So just like the ocean, the lakes are probably also going to get warmer as well.
Wonderful.
Well, that's good. Can I just add to that that's cool. I hadn't thought about that. But when you take what you said, that's a real problem for rural Illinois because, like last year, a whole bunch of, croplands along the rivers flooded. I know lots of farmers really struggled with that this year. You can talk to almost any farming person and they're 2 weeks behind on planting. So that's kind of how it affects rural Illinois. Just something to think about.
Yes, Jody. I mean, that's exactly what we need to know as we're talking to voters. And I'm wondering, Jenny, would you like to come off mute? She had some information about the question about indigenous cultures.
I was just going to say, Annie brought up a really good point. So traditional ecological knowledge, which is what we get from indigenous cultures, is extremely valuable to land conservation. There's a big push we're seeing right now to implement a lot of their practices into our current land management. So that's really important. And then just kind of like listening to them and like their way of life, their way of governance. One of the biggest problems that like we have, and one of the best ways to address it is climate change and all the other environmental issues we have, is by focusing on policy. Like you said, we need to review a lot of these like neoliberal policies that we passed, and we can turn to like indigenous cultures and look at their land ethic and how they relate to the land and how they see their obligation to the earth, and use that to guide policy. So Annie, that was just like, that hit me when you said that right away. But thank you.
Yes, and
I'm good if anybody else
Okay.
wants to keep the conversation going, or if anybody had any questions about that.
and they can, and they
Sorry,
can
I didn't
to ask you too in the chat, Jenny. So I think we're going to start to wind this down. Of course, we are so grateful to Dr. Schafer for her incredible presentation. I thoroughly enjoyed it. There was a lot in there that I didn't know before. I really appreciate it, and I really appreciate the sources that you gave us, and so much of your good information. But of course, Dr. Schafer is in Florida, so that means it's an hour later for her.
Yeah.
And so, and she has very early mornings, and as I understand, she spends some of her time walking around in the muck.
Yeah, luckily not tomorrow, but I do have an early morning. I have
Okay.
to drive out and do some lab work. So
All right.
yeah,
Well,
thank you all for listening.
we thank you so very much, Dr.
Thank you,
Schafer, for your
Tracey.
time with us. You just did a magnificent job. But don't leave us, everybody. We're going to say goodnight to Tracey, but we're going to go on with our presentation because we're going to work now on building a truth sandwich with some of the information that Dr. Schafer has given us. So many,
All right.
many thanks to you.
Thank you, Tracey. You rock. As
Great.
always.
Good
you
night,
rock.
everyone.
You're fabulous. You're just wonderful. So thank you so much for being with us. And we'll let you say goodnight, and we'll go on with our work. Okay.
Great. Good night.
Good night. All right. So we will now pass the baton on. Candace, are you or is Etta going to lead us in trying to create a truth sandwich out of some of the information that we learned tonight?
Yeah, Linda's also here.
I was
And
gonna say,
Linda, yes.
Etta and Linda and I are gonna try to pull it together. So, Etta,
Okay.
do you want me to pull up the presentation? We can go through.
Right, and you need to make Candace the co-host so she can share.
Okay. I thought I did that, but here, let me.
See, I think you did.
I
nope, you
needed to do it
disabled.
again. There we go. You're the co-host now. Okay.
Okay.
So just so people know what a truth sandwich is, you're going to show us quickly.
Yes, we're gonna quickly, and then we're gonna get to the hard work of creating one, but we wanted to show you, hold on, there we go. Desktop 2. It's loading.
And if people see me driving around and they see my bumper sticker, they'll know that was a gift from Candace.
There you go, for her participation. Okay, can you see that one?
No, we're seeing something else. We're not
Oh,
seeing. what you
okay,
wanna show
hold
us.
on. I don't know why it did that. All right,
I have to pick a different thing.
let me try that again. Let me come back to Zoom. It switched screens on me. Sorry.
It's quite all right.
Now it won't give me back my controls. There we go, Zoom. Come on. I have to talk nice to it.
Or we could just talk.
Actually, I was going to say, Ada, why don't you just let me play with this for a second? But why don't you know this drill? Why don't you talk a little bit about what Truth Brigade and Truth Brigade Illinois are?
Okay, and maybe we'll get some graphics to go with it at some point, but if not, It's cool. Who are we? Well, Candace is from Indivisible Evanston. She's a retired corporate attorney. Linda Callis, she's a retired accountant and activist with Indivisible DuPage. And I'm I was founder of Western Front Indivisible. I'm a writer and a filmmaker, retired professor, and now activist. So we've got different bases covered with what we're doing. But what is Truth Brigade and Truth Brigade Illinois? Well, we got.
You see that one now?
Yeah, we do.
Cool.
So this was created by the national group back in August of 2020, and I was lucky enough to go to the first introduction of this. Truth Brigade Illinois actually got going in 2021, and we're trying to counter disinformation as a national group is, but also, and you took the slide away from me.
Oh, sorry.
and just really expand what national is doing, but also think about how that connects to us in Illinois.
Got it. And the way we do that is we counter disinformation by trying to share accurate information. And we are not trying to change the minds of the far right. We cannot change the minds of some of those climate deniers. We're trying to get the people in the middle who might be persuadable. So we do that by sharing information on social media and in face-to-face discussions using an approach that's designed to build on our commonalities. And we try to point out disinformation and then who and why is spreading disinformation, and then share our vision of how we think things should be. Let me go to the next one. And Linda, do you want to cover best practices?
Sure. Okay, so one of the big ones is if you see something that has disinformation and you're getting really angry about it and you really want to counter it, you do not want to comment or react to that particular post. That just spreads it. The algorithms love interaction, and the more something gets interaction, the more it gets shared. So don't do that. Try not to use their terms and their language. You need to kind of talk about it, but not, let their words become the main thing that you're talking about. You want it to sound like it comes from you. So you might see something that you like, but you might want to put it in your own words. It's best not to argue, but try to find some common values with people, however you can. Doesn't always work. And just sharing facts is not really, it's good to have facts, but the discussion needs to be trying to get people to, do some critical thinking around things. So sometimes the value gets through more than the fact itself. You want to be, try to get to the persuadable people, as somebody said. And if you're, wherever you're on, we want to use our hashtag Truth Brigade and hashtag, actually for us, Truth Brigade Illinois.
And the way we do that is with, the Indivisible Truth Sandwich. Did you want to talk about our sandwich?
Yes, first of all, we start with something that we have in common, some kind of shared value. It's kind of a truth, something that we all, or almost all of us, can agree on. So we don't start with a lie or disinformation. We start with the truth. Then we try to disrupt this lie or bit of disinformation by kind of asking questions and trying to help people, because part of what we're doing is getting people to think critically, have people think and ask questions. Who's behind the message? Why do they want me angry? And then we end with a truth. It has to do with the future, a better future, a reason to remember, a vision. And some people actually look at the sandwich and talk about it in terms of values on the top, villains in the middle, and then vision on the bottom.
Yeah, I like the 3V formula. That's the one way to remember it clearly is the values, villains, vision is a good way to remember the top, middle, and bottom of the sandwich. And here's an example. Etta came up with this one. I like it. You want to go ahead and
Well,
share
I
it?
actually, let's give Candace some credit.
Okay.
She wrote one, but she confessed that she had been doing this when she was falling asleep or about to fall asleep. So I went and edited it and made it a little shorter, because if you're using it on Twitter, you do have some length to think about. So no matter our color or zip code, we all want our kids and grandkids to have a habitable environment. That first part is the value, the common shared value. Pretty much everybody will agree to that. Trump Republicans resist major climate legislation. Wonder if they care about the future. And that's
There's your
the middle
villain.
part. Yep, the villain. Then we're going to end. Climate crisis is too urgent to let climate deniers take control. Truth Brigade, Illinois, or Truth Brigade, Illinois. So we always like to include some kind of graphic or a link to an article that may have a graphic, because people see it. I look at things online that have pictures. So that's what we could possibly put with that.
Okay. All right. I'm going to stop sharing because I think Linda is preparing to help us create our own truth sandwich based on some of the things we learned tonight.
And Marcy, am I able to share? Yeah, could you let me share?
I think Sarah is the
There, I
host.
got
Oh,
you.
Sarah, sorry.
Yeah, yes, Sarah. Okay, yeah.
There you go.
Okay, let me try again. Okay, here we go. And let's see. Find the. Okay, can everybody see that?
It's little, but we can see it.
Okay, I will make it much bigger. I don't really have much in here yet, so
Okay.
yeah, it's funny because I
much
can see
better.
it. Is that much better? Okay, there we go.
Yeah, that's much better.
Yeah.
Okay,
That was my
so
comment. You can take that out.
okay, I will take that out. All right.
You know, the truth is we're not going to be able to persuade people. What we want is to raise questions, and somebody who's willing to step back from an entrenched position, they may start going, yeah.
So I'm wondering, I'm going to throw this out and you guys can decide, as a different way to think about this, rather than saying, we want our grandkids to have a good future. What about something like nobody wants to think of themselves as selfish?
Ooh,
Wow.
that's interesting.
Okay.
So put it in there, but
And what's the but?
well, I was gonna say, okay, then, but or maybe it's a however.
Yeah.
Let's see. Then why do I don't even want to go with Republicans, but
Some people.
I would say the
MAGA faction is one of our favorites because it's a narrower group of
Yeah.
Republicans.
Yeah.
but it's not just that. I mean, it's the
Right wing.
how about Republicans who are, let's see, then why are Republicans
or extremists.
why
Mhm.
that might be better.
Yeah, there you go.
Because we don't want to, we're trying, especially if we're talking rural, right? We don't want to necessarily get into
Political affiliation. Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes
Um,
total sense.
How about less informed?
Ooh, why do the less informed?
Yeah, but you're already being, well, yeah, I was gonna say, where are you
That's
going
a
with that?
judgment.
Because the less informed is gonna start, well, yeah, I don't know who you're, yeah. Where are you going with it, Linda?
No,
Um,
it's Garrick.
No,
I
but
said less informed.
Yeah, no, I know. I was just, I
Oh.
was just trying to figure out where we're going with this sentence. What we're trying, where Linda was trying to say something and now lesson, yeah.
I only said that because of Tracy's presentation, because if more people saw her presentation, which was pretty concrete.
Mhm.
That's why I said less informed.
Yeah, yeah. But if Linda's going after him for,
Now, let's see what she's got here.
So this
Then
is what I
why do
came,
the extremists care more about today's profits than their children's future?
I like that.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's good.
yeah.
Yes.
yeah.
So that-
I think using the word extremist is waving a red flag in front of a bull.
Mm,
Well, let's get through the truth sandwich first, and we go back and
tweak
I
some
will,
vocabulary.
yeah, I will highlight that word so we remember.
I agree with Terry.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
yeah, that's a good point,
Okay.
Terry. The question is, yeah, if we're calling out the bad guys, what language do we want to use? But yeah, let's keep going.
Okay. So then what is?
I can think of a few other choice words, but I try not to use them on Facebook.
okay.
Idiot.
So what's the vision part?
What do we have to lose? What do we have to lose by combating climate change?
Well, they're gonna lose money. That's what
It's
they're running
expensive,
from.
Yeah,
It is, it's about money. It drives me crazy.
yeah. Yeah. Then maybe the question is money more important than the future of our earth, the future of our home?
And maybe not as a question, but as a, all of our,
I put something in
Yeah,
chat.
Terry put something and I like, no one wants to think themselves as selfish, but how to explain why so many people care more about today's profits than their children's future? That's not a, yeah.
So then we avoid the word extremists.
Yep.
so how to explain, say that again?
Why so many people care more about
Ah,
today's profits
yes.
than their children's future.
And we're not naming those people. Why
Yeah.
do so many people? And people, the interesting thing is, I think when a lot of people who really do believe this and would agree with it, would read that, they'd say, that's not me.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. And so you're drawing them in.
Then do we need to bring in, because there's going to be this implicit question that some people will have, but what do we have to do it because it's not man-made? So do we have to somehow address that in our vision?
I think that's what I was trying to say with what do we have to lose? If it is man-made, we can fix it. If it's not man-made, so what? What happened anyway? We've got to lose.
We have a lot to lose.
Yeah.
If it's not man-made.
Well, I think I get what Phil's trying to say. He's saying that, if it's not man-made and we do things for it, we're doing fine anyway, even though it may not help as much. But if it is man-made and we're not doing anything, we're really hurting things. That's what you're
Right.
saying, right, Phil? So we have, that's why we have to do something about it, even if we don't think it's man-made, it's for it. So something like that.
Right. It's not going to hurt anybody to make those efforts.
Well, but
It is
but
gonna
the
hurt
problem
somebody
is
who don't.
people don't think that, controlling, the problem is people think they don't need to worry about controlling carbon emissions because carbon emissions aren't the problem. I mean, I think you do need to, in order to get people to focus, you do need to get them to admit that we're doing it, don't you?
Okay, so Linda's working on a final statement. So what do you have here, Linda?
So we need to work together on that future. by getting educated
Advocating for
and
policy
advocating for the right policies.
and maybe not right, because what
the-
are the right kind of advocate for?
You know what, can I say, I don't care, the problem, we're not gonna get the policies until we get the elected officials. Can we go straight to voting?
Yeah.
There we
I like
go.
that better. I like Candace's better.
No,
Yeah.
we need
So
to work
getting educated and
I'm getting the right, getting.
voting for the right,
Maybe not.
for
um,
the,
For environmentally concerned politicians. Or, yeah, candidates, politicians or whatever.
Yeah.
I had a suggestion for that middle sentence where you say, why do people care more about today's profits than their children's future? And then add, but if we address climate issues, it will be better for everyone.
And add another sentence. If we address climate issues, it will be better for everyone.
Yes.
Yeah,
And that means that, the people that are interested in profits, there will be opportunities to make
That's
profits
true.
too.
Yeah.
But we can also make the climate better for everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there are people who don't think there's any issue with climate. So I took a different tactic, and my third sentence was, it's worth it to me to make small changes in my life if it means my children have a good future or a better future.
No, I don't buy it, because it's not about us making small changes. I mean, sure, that's the only thing we can do sometimes, but what we need is major. There's no way us making small changes is going to save us from the burning down the world in the next 5 years.
I was just, hooking onto something that Tracey said.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's kind of like, what can I do? It's like, you can make small changes, but the big thing you need to do is vote them out or vote them in.
Yeah, that makes sense. I like the let's get the voting in there, Candace. I like that part.
We said candidates, right?
I'd like to say something. What you're experiencing right now is what we do in our truth sandwich shops.
Yep.
We wrestle with issues and try and come up with language that will not change people's mind, but will have people go, yeah. Or they'll go, oh yeah, that's right, great. I'm gonna say like this, or I'm going to share it, on Twitter or Facebook or whatever. And then it gets out to more people. And then some people are gonna say, oh yeah, that's true. So that's what we're trying to do.
And I think doing this practice helps people see that it is a struggle. When we've tried to do it in our group, it's a struggle, but by struggling through it, you come up with a better product and then everyone is so generous with their truth sandwiches, because the whole intent is to get them out to as many people as possible. So it's not like you create this thing and then you have ownership of it. You create this thing and you send it out into the world. Yeah. And so because of time, I'm going to thank our wonderful truth sandwich team. The three of you work like clockwork.
Yes,
and I think if we can,
awesome.
We can look at that final product that we came up with, that you three came up with pretty quickly. Let's just read through it. No one wants to think of themselves as selfish, but how to explain why so many people care more about today's profits than their children's future. If we address climate issues, it will be better for everyone. We need to work together on that future by getting educated and voting for environmentally concerned candidates. That's powerful, guys. That's powerful. Feel free to steal it. Linda, isn't it okay if we?
Yeah, I put it in the chat. The only thing that I didn't have yet when I put it in the chat was the # for Truth Brigade and Truth Brigade, Illinois.
And be sure you do that. So
be sure to do that.
Is that tweetable?
You'd have to count the characters.
It's
not
probably
sure.
a little long,
It's
Alan,
probably
but
long for Twitter. We'd have to play with it.
Yeah, but
Maybe we'll work on it tomorrow.
yeah. Join them for the Truth Sandwich Shop.
Yep.
So
Yes.
I'm going to wind us up tonight. I think that I hope that Tracey saw some of the comments about how wonderful everyone thought her presentation was. I thought she was absolutely fabulous. We want to have a big shout out and thank you to our Truth Brigade team for leading us through this. We thank you all for being here with us and your wonderful comments and questions and things, information that you shared in the chat. So thank you all for being here.
And if you want to save the chat, go to the bottom lower right-hand corner. That you'll see 3 dots right across from where it says to everyone, whatever. Go down to the bottom right-hand corner. There'll be 3 dots. Click on that and you'll be able to save the chat.
And miracle of miracles, we remembered to record. So
Yeah.
we
will send it out.
We'll send it out to those who were not able to be here tonight. So
Yeah.
thank you all. Enjoy your evening and thank you for being with us.
Thank you
Take
for
good
coming,
care.
guys. And
Bye,
thank you,
everybody.
Brigade. You guys all rock as always.
Yeah, you're amazing. We love
Yes.
you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wonderful night. Wonderful night. Good to see you, Phil.
Good to see you.
Yeah.
Thank you for doing this.
Yeah. Oops. I have to stop recording again, I guess. Stop recording.
Great session.
Oh, I canceled it. Stop